Hello everyone, this is Keith from the Solo Gamers Club and welcome to my channel. Tonight we're going to be continuing with our playthrough of The Lamps Are Going Out, World War I, and it's going to be the fall of 1915. I've been enjoying this game so much that I kind of wasn't paying attention to the filming schedule of this, and I'm going to have to try to compress, I think, the gameplay in the videos. So I think what I'm going to do from here out is I'll be showing the event card draws, and then I will discuss what I'm going to do on the board for that faction. I'll resolve it and then show you the results, and we should be able to get through the game a little quicker that way than viewing all of the dice rolls and everything else. So I think we'll do that. These are the casualty figures thus far in the game, and 508 regiments have been casualties throughout this first 4 turns of the game. I have one correction to make from the previous video. We drew the flamethrowers card last turn for Germany, and at the bottom it says draw one more event card, and I didn't do that. So we will be drawing an extra event for Germany. And the cards revealed to be card number 36, U-Boats Unleashed, a 1915 card. May immediately refit one spent U-boat at no cost. Immediately advance one level of tech in group U. So that's going to give us the U2 technology, which is great. So Germany is going to gain U2 technology, and that's fire control. Advanced torpedo and fire control methods improve the success rate of the U-boats. U-83, typical of the mid to late war U-boats, the U-83 sailed its 11 patrols from November 1916 to November 1918, sinking 36 ships for a total of 110,160 tons. Card effects listed on the U-boat attack tables. Each German fleet may make one reroll of their naval combat attack dice. All right. Well, that's great. And now their event draw for this turn is card number 37, Bled White, 1915 card. Choose a German-controlled area with at least one army. The first French army defeated this turn by a German army located in the selected area with a 3+ differential is removed from the map and returned to the force pool. Wow, that's great. And our U-Boats Unleashed card allows us to flip a spent U-boat at no cost, so we will do that. That's great. All right. Well, the situation in Germany is extremely precarious. So I think what we're going to do is to try to get the Austrians into the fray. I'm going to move a German army into Galicia. And as long as there is a German army in a location, the Austrians don't have to worry about that shackled to a corpse, and that would give them a little bit more of offensive capability. So I'll move a German army there. We'll probably attack Brest-Litovsk. That will cut off Poland. And I'll probably end up relocating the 18th Army to Belgium to try to preserve that. We'll see if we can. I guess the side that tries to defend everything defends nothing, they claim, so it might be the wrong choice, but we'll see what happens. So I'm going to resolve Germany's turn, and I'll show you the results, and then we will come back, and I'll show you determine their technological advance, and then we'll move on, and I'll try to make this proceed a little quicker. Well, here are the results of the German movement and combat phase. The Germans attempted to attack into the Rhine in hopes of being able to use this Bled White card, but unfortunately they didn't have the dice roll differentials in the 2 successful attacks that they had, so we weren't able to use that card. I made a few attacks in Belgium without success, and we were able to drive the Russians back in Brest-Litovsk, and we've isolated Poland. So I'm hoping that during the Austro-Hungarian turn, we've got a German unit in Galicia that will remove them from the shackled to a corpse, -1 dice roll modifier. And I'm hoping to possibly move a army into Poland, and we would have a pretty decent front line here, and we'll see what happens. All right, I'm going to go into the German production phase. Well, Germany lost one U-boat in the unrestricted submarine warfare box, but one is still active. We've managed to refit all of our armies in the west, and I've refit all of the armies in the east with the exception of the German 18th in Galicia. It won't matter, even if it's spent. The Austrians are removed from that shackle to a corpse counter, so that's good. Germans had no success in the technology area, and they've regrouped their artillery. They did have success in East Africa, and they managed, Letov Vorbeck managed to spend the British East African Army, which is great. That'll be the extent of the German turn. We'll move on to the Western Allies. I think the Western Allies, my first hunch would be to move the British Second Army into the Somme and make a push into Belgium. But what I'm thinking on doing is moving the Second Army and reinforcing the beachhead in Gallipoli. The Turkish First Army is spent. If we were able to get a victory, we can drive them out and take the capital of Constantinople. So that's what I'm going to propose that I do. And we'll see if the response table agrees with me. So my question for the response table is, should I move the British Second Army by sea to the Gallipoli beachhead? Roll is a 7, and it says yes, but. Well, I'm not sure what the but will be, but we'll take the yes. It's not a full strength yes, but we'll do that. Before we do any movements, so I have to take care of the event card phase. And the Allies draw the 1915 card, Treaty of London. If Italy is neutral, it's not. Italy is at war, so it will have no effect, and that card is removed. And here's the results of the Western powers' actions. The British Second Army was moved into the beachhead at Gallipoli, but it failed in its attack, and the First Turkish held the hills above Gallipoli. In the Near East, the British stayed quiet, and we have the Indian Expeditionary Force occupying Baghdad and the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force ready to go in Sinai. On the Western Front, an Anglo-British army in the Somme attempted to get into Belgium. That was repulsed, but they made a huge effort in the Rhine attempting to go after Hanover. Germany lost one of their inspired leadership tokens on one of their armies. All of the armies were spent by the French in the Rhine, and all the German armies were spent, but they didn't have enough force to drive the Germans out. So that's where we stand on the Western Front, and we'll move on to the production phase. During the production phase, Britain lost a production point to U-boat activity. In Italy, I failed to mention the First Army launched an attack into Austria, and that failed. Italy was able to rebuild its First Army, and it built a spent Fourth Army. England ended up giving them one production point during the phase. France rebuilt almost all of its armies in the Rhine with the exception of one, and they were unable to refit those armies in the Somme. Britain ended up refitting both armies, including the old Contemptibles, and they also refit their army in East Africa and the two armies on the beachhead in Gallipoli. That's going to bring the Western Allies' turn to a close, and we'll move on to the Eastern Allies. Eastern Allies draw the event number 52, Open Ocean Policy 1915 card, the USA entry track +1. If either U-boats is currently fresh, and they are. So the U.S. entry track is going to move up 1. And that's going to increase the entry track up to 3. When it gets up to 5, the U.S. will come in against Germany. Well, the Serbs are a beaten army. They're currently in Albania, and they cannot do a retreat into Greece. So if there is an attack into Albania, a successful one, the Serbs are going to be no more. On the Russian front, most of the armies are spent, but they do have a force in the Ukraine. And I think what they would probably do is use those forces in the Ukraine and attempt to retake Brest-Litovsk. Well, the Russians attempted to attack Brest-Litovsk. The first attack was a failure, and I decided to hold off on any more offensive operations. The Russians have plenty of units to refit. The Russians ended up refitting as many armies as they could. They have a total of 3 functional armies in Ukraine, 2 in Minsk, and 1 in Lithuania. That's going to bring the Eastern Allies to a close, and we'll move on to the Central Allies. Central Allies draw the card number 107, Rasputia, 1915 card. It says it only applies on a spring and fall turn. The mud season impedes the Central Powers in Russia. See Event 107. Add to next year's event deck. Draw 1 more event. Well, we'll read about that a little bit. Now, basically, that card represents severe mud conditions on the Eastern Front. And what this would do, this is a fall turn. So what will happen is all German and Austro-Hungarian heavy artillery units in any Russian territory must immediately be flipped from ready to fired. We don't have any of that situation right now. But it does say that all Russian areas except the Don, Caucasus, and Kars are treated as the Pripyat marshes for the Central Allies this turn. This means that units moving into one of these spaces must stop and move no further, and units advancing after combat into these spaces must stop and may attack no further. All right. I think with the current situation, that mud situation on the Russian front, I'm going to just stand pat, I think, with the Austrians. What I'll probably end up doing is relocating a few armies in Hungary that are no longer needed. We'll probably move the 5th to Austria and the 2nd to Galicia, and try to rebuild any spent armies that we have. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't provide any production points to Bulgaria or Turkey, so those fronts are in desperate need. We'll see what happens. I ended up moving a fresh army, the 5th, into Austria to help defend on that Italian front, and the 2nd Army into Galicia to help defend against any Russian attack next turn. We still have 2 fresh units in Serbia, but unfortunately only 1 Bulgarian unit there. And we're going to move on to our production phase. Turkey refit the 1st Army in Gallipoli. Austria, with its 3 points of production, was able to refit an army in Austria, but unfortunately I have no other armies to build, and I ended up wasting 2 production points for Austria because I had nothing else I could do. There wasn't any other units to refit. I should have probably launched a few attacks knowing that, but I did not. So that is going to bring the Central Allies turn to a close, and we'll move on to the winter of 1915. We'll begin with the German turn of the winter of 1915, and the event card is number 33, Völkerscourge, 1915. Immediately advance 1 level in Tech Group P. That is great. And during the German regroup phase, you may deploy all currently possessed air superiority markers this turn without conducting a dogfight. That is great. So we're going to get out that P1 technology for Germany. So Germany is upgraded to aerial reconnaissance, and that's the P1 level. That's great. And unfortunately, I forgot about the Rasputia card that we drew earlier. It says to draw 1 more event, so I didn't do that. So we ended up drawing the Skoda Works. A1 technology is active for Germany, or for the Central Powers. You may reset 1 heavy artillery to ready. The first heavy artillery attack made this turn has an automatic roll of 6. No roll is necessary. Well, that card wouldn't have been useful to us anyway. So, all right. Well, our lines in the east are pretty thin, so I'm probably going to have to move something over there. We do have 3 viable armies in Bavaria. I'm never going to be able to pop them out of the Rhine, though. And I don't have enough strength in Belgium to go after the Somme this turn. So I think we're probably going to take a light approach to the combat this turn. I might launch one attack using the heavy artillery. I can't use it from there. Those are all spent. So I might relocate the heavy artillery, and then we'll just try to rebuild the spent armies we have and maybe perhaps build some new armies as well. All right, Germany ended up launching one attack into the Rhine trying to use their heavy artillery. That was unsuccessful. In the east, they attempted a pincer attack against the Russian forces in Lithuania. The attack from Brest-Litovsk went great, and we had 2 shots at trying to force the Russians into retreat, but the 3rd and 9th armies in Prussia didn't do it. So that is the extent of the combat during the German turn. I'm going to go to the production phase. All right, the German production, the U-boats were fine. There was no trouble with the unrestricted submarine warfare box, no damage. I ended up refitting an army in Belgium, refitting an armies in Bavaria and Hanover, building a new German 11th in Bavaria. And then I was able to refit most of the armies on the Eastern Front, and I did send 1 production point to Bulgaria. I want to get their armies back up to snuff. And we'll move on to the technology phase. And Germany ended up getting A2 technology, planned barrages. And that says Germany places 1 additional heavy artillery unit in any land-supplied area containing at least a German army. Roll 3 dice when attacking if air superiority marker, either ready or flown, is present with the firing artillery. Flip to the fired side. If the opponent has A2, you may take A1. Okay, that won't apply, but we will get an additional German heavy artillery token. And we'll see where we're going to place that. And I think I'm going to place that in Hanover. So we'll place that in Hanover. And now we get to do our regroup phase. And now we have that air superiority counter that we can place. And since this is the Fokker Scourge, the Fokker Scourge card is out, it's going to allow us to deploy all currently possessed air superiority markers this turn without conducting a dogfight. So I think we're going to place that in Hanover. That'll help to defend that area. And then we can refit our artillery. And that's going to bring Germany to a close, and we'll move on to the Western Allies. And the Western Allies draw the event USA Vested Interests, card number 42, a 1915 card. USA entry marker +1. During the Western Allies production modifier step, Great Britain receives +1 production point. All right. So the USA entry marker moves up another slot. They're at 4. They're halfway to declaring war. As a reminder for that USA vested interest, I'm going to place a production transfer point in the British Isles to remind me about that WA production phase where they will gain +1. Well, during the Western Allies phase, I think they're going to probably try to use the Italian front to further put more pressure on the Austrians, and they'll probably make some minor attacks into Belgium and possibly Bavaria and Hanover. And then on the East Africa board, the British East African Army is available. They'll probably try to go after Lettow Vorbeck. He's consuming a ton of supplies that we could be using on the Western Front, which is what he's supposed to do. And then on the Turkish front, I think there'll be, with that added production from the Americans, they'll probably try to make attacks on all sectors from Sinai, Baghdad, and on the landing beaches in Gallipoli. Well, the British attack in East Africa failed, and Letov Vorbeck is still at full strength. The attacks in the Middle East were partially successful. The MEF was successful in an attack against Jerusalem, but the Indian Expeditionary Force was unsuccessful in Mosul, and I've only tried one attack with the British 4th in Gallipoli, and that was unsuccessful. So I've halted my operations there. In Italy, the Italians were able to make a little progress. They damaged 2 Austrian armies, but it of course cost them there too. But they made no advances into Austria. Then on the Western Front, the British attempted to attack into Belgium. They were able to spend 1 British army there, and a token attack from the French in the Rhine into Bavaria failed, and that was the extent of the combat. So we're going to move to our production phase. The Western Allies actually drew the A2 heavy artillery card, but that said that if the opponent has A2, you gain A1. So they'll be gaining the A1 heavy artillery card. That says Western Allies place 2 heavy artillery units, and Russia places 1 in any land-supplied areas containing at least 1 army from the same faction. That's going to allow them to roll 2 dice when attacking as well. Russians are going to place their heavy artillery into the Ukraine. The Allies will place 1 in the Rhine and 1 in the Somme. And it ended up that Britain was able to refit all of their armies on the Western Front, in Africa, and all of the armies in the Near East. Italy was able to refit 2 armies. They have 1 spent, and the French were able to refit all of their armies. The British did lose 1 production point to unrestricted sub-warfare. And that will bring the turn to a close. We'll move on to the Eastern Allies. And the Eastern Allies draw the card number 106, Tsar Takes Command. It's a 1915 card. The first 2 Russian attacks this turn suffer a -1 attack penalty. If Brusilov is in effect this turn, there is no penalty. Draw 1 more event. All right. The event is card number 51, a 1915 card, Scorched Earth. Place on this card. Russian armies may now opt to legally retreat all armies in an area in lieu of making a unit spent after a combat loss. The attacker is spent and advances into the area which the Russians just abandoned without making a garrison die roll. All right. So we'll place this Scorched Earth token on that card. Well, with that Tsar Takes Command card, it's going to be -1 to the attacks. So I don't think Russia's going to be making too many attacks this turn. Technically, they would have the ability to drive the Germans out of Brest-Litovsk with a successful attack, and then they would be able to advance both of those armies. So they might try something like that, using the Ukraine, and then see if the forces in Minsk could move up. They might try something like that. Well, the Russians made some attacks, and they were able to drive the Germans into retreat. The forces from Brest-Litovsk retreated into Prussia, and 4 Russian armies ended up moving in. So the Russian line now is more solid. Now they do have a little bit of lack of resources in the Ukraine, which Austro-Hungary might be able to exploit, so we'll have to see what happens. We're going to be moving now on to the production phase. Russia ended up rebuilding an army in Lithuania, 1 in Brest-Litovsk, and both of those in the Ukraine. So that's still a little bit of a problem here. The Austro-Hungarians might be able to exploit that. That'll bring the Eastern Allies' turn to a close. We'll move on to the Central Allies. And they end up drawing Mustafa Kemal, card number 46, a 1915 card. Place on a Turkish army. A DRM of +1 when defending. All right. And I think we're going to place that Mustafa Kemal token on the First Army in Gallipoli, and that's where he historically deployed to, and he was actually quite important in denying a British breakout from the beachheads. Well, Turkey is pretty much going to stand pat. They have to repair their army in Jerusalem for sure. And the First Army, luckily, in Gallipoli is in good shape, so we won't be making any offensive moves with the Turks. Now, on the Russian and Italian fronts, I think we might be attempting to make a play into the Ukraine. And now that we've got a German unit there in Galicia, that will remove us from the shackled to the corpse token. But I have a lot of units that I need to repair yet. Well, not a lot, but 2 of them. So I'll probably do this in a way that doesn't destroy our economy. Well, the Austrians were able to attack from Galicia into Ukraine, and they spent both of the Russian armies. I decided to hold off on trying to drive them out because I only have, 3 production points, and I'm going to be slim on that department to begin with. So we'll go to our production phase. The Turks have 1 production point. They're going to spend that refitting the Second Army in Jerusalem. The Bulgarians have 1 production point, and they're going to refit the Bulgarian army, 1st Bulgarian Army in Bulgaria. And I'm a little worried about the Allies moving that force into Salonika, or eventually Greece coming in. Then I ended up refitting most of the armies in Galicia, and now we have 2 fit armies in Austria with 1 spent. The Italians aren't hopefully going to be able to take any major action there, so for the time being, that's what we have. All right, so we're going to move on to our spring of 1916 turn, and that means that the 1916 event cards will be added to the decks. And we'll begin with the German event draw, and they get first line formations for Germany. It's a 1914 to 1915 card, so we can't use it. The text says remove the marker at the end of 1915 if not used. If drawn in 1918, draw 1 more event. Well, we don't get to draw another one, so that card is just discarded. So what are we going to do with Germany? Now, one thing I failed to do, partly due or mostly due to the fact I didn't have enough production with all of the things that happened, is normally I would have entrenched. Germany has an advantage when entrenching. They can place a trench for 1 resource point, and they can actually build 2 trenches in the same location at the same time. Normally, the Allies are only able to build 1 trench at a time in an area, and it costs them 2. For us, it costs 1 each, and we can place a double if we choose to. But with this situation now, we have several armies that are spent. We have 4 armies that are spent starting the turn. We have Central Powers air superiority in Hanover, and we've got the 3 German heavy artillery units with planned barrages, and that allows us to roll 3 dice when attacking if air superiority marker, either ready or flown, is present with the firing artillery. So I think what we'll probably try to do is take advantage of that, and we'll launch an attack into the Rhine from Hanover using that heavy artillery, and we'll see if we can make some kind of a dent. Then based upon the results of that, we might attack from Bavaria. I'll probably hold up in Belgium, and I think I'm going to try to build some trenches if possible. On the Eastern Front, I think what I might do there, we have 7 Russian armies, of which 3, 4 of them are able to attack. So we don't really have to worry too much about Prussia. We'll see what happens. Well, the results are we had some good attacks from Hanover, and we ended up spending a total of 3 French units there by help of that heavy artillery. I did make an incursion into Poland with the 9th German Army, and I ended up rebuilding all of those armies. The only one we have not rebuilt is the 18th, which is in Galicia. As a part of the production transfer, I gave 1 point to Bulgaria and 1 point to Turkey. We made our guerrilla attack in Tanga with Letov Vorbeck. It was unsuccessful. So that is going to bring Germany's turn to a close. We'll move on to the Western Allies. Western Allies now have heavy artillery in the Somme and heavy artillery in the Rhine. So I would imagine they are going to be attacking into Belgium. I did build a German trench, by the way, in Belgium. And we'll see what happens. So that's what their planning is going to be. We'll draw an event card for the Western Allies. And they draw the 1916 card, Arms Race. If you do not have C1, take it now and no further effect. Well, the Western Allies do not have C1, so they are going to gain the C1 technology. So the Allies get C1 counter battery. Western Allies in Russia places 1 heavy artillery unit in any land supplied area containing at least 1 army from the same nation. Roll 2 dice when attacking or defending. Flip to the fired side. All right. And I think the Western Allies are going to place that extra artillery unit in the Somme. All right, we're going to make their movements and attacks, and we'll see what happens. Incidentally, Germany's technology card was an A3 Stoßtruppen, and they couldn't keep that. Well, the French attacks went fairly well. They spent nearly all of the forces in the Somme, with the exception of the 6th French, and they were able to spend and breach the trenches in Belgium. They spent 2 German armies there. They did try a token attack into Bavaria using the heavy artillery in the Rhine. That failed. In East Africa, they launched an attack against Letov Vorbeck, and that failed, so that army is spent. We almost had a problem in Gallipoli, though. In the Near East, the MEF was successful in spending the 2nd Army in Jerusalem, and they launched 2 attacks from their beachhead here, and Mustafa Kemal was in command. They were spent on the first one, and the British, if they would have succeeded with that 2nd attack, could have sent the Turks running. Now, obviously, that would have been a definite problem for us, but Mustafa Kemal ended up hanging on. So I'm going to go to the production phase. In the Near East, Britain ended up refitting both armies in Gallipoli, and they refit their British East African army. On the Western Front, they refit both British armies in the Somme, and we did not lose any from unrestricted submarine warfare, so that was interesting. The artillery is now reset, and that's going to finish the Western powers' turn. And finally, the Western powers ended up getting U2 technology, and that's anti-submarine warfare. Card effects listed on the U-boat attack and attrition tables will apply. And that's the development of the depth charge. And now we're going to move to our Eastern allies, and we're going to draw a event card for them. I think the strategy for their turn is Russia has still 2, 3, 4, 5 spent armies. And so they're having trouble even trying to build new armies because they haven't refit the old ones yet. So I think what we'll probably try to do is just the Russians will hold, I think, for this point. We could launch an attack from Brest-Litovsk, maybe into Poland or something, and try to kick them out of there, but it's just weakening us, and I think we'll just probably stand pat. I think we have to refit the armies. I'd like to entrench, but I don't think we have the resources for that. And the Eastern Allies draw the card USA Isolationists, 1916. If it was the winter of 1916 game turn, no effect. Any other game turn, if Lusitania sunk and the Atlanticists event already drawn, the USA entry track -1. Otherwise, USA entry track -2. So that's going to move the USA track down 2, which is great. So we'll decrease that entry track down by 2. That's fantastic. The Russians relocated their heavy artillery into Brest-Litovsk, and they launched an attack into Poland, and they were able to recapture that, driving the German 9th out to Posen. Now, I could have followed up on this and moved in the 4th Army as well, and then attempted to take Posen, and I'm still thinking about trying that. Might be worthwhile. I think they'll try it. They're going to move in the 4th as well. I'll make this roll live, and we'll see what happens. So they're going to spend the Russian 4th, and they're going to attack into Posen. And the Russians won 6-5. That's going to drive the Germans out. And the Russian 4th advances into Posen, cutting off Prussia and taking 3 production points away from the Germans. Oh my goodness. And I think that's going to end it for the Russians. We're going to do their production phase now. The Russians ended up refitting the 4th Army, the 3rd Army, one in Lithuania and one in Brest-Litovsk. So right now, Prussia is isolated. They can attack out of there. There's no penalty for attacking unsupplied, but if they're not able to get resupplied, those armies cannot refit. So that almost forces Germany to attack Posen next turn. All right, that is going to end it for the Russians, and we'll move on now to the Central Allies. And the Central Allies draw the card Rasputia again, and that was mixed in because it's supposed to be added to the next year's event deck, and we drew it right now. And what that does is that it will apply to spring and fall turns. So that will apply this turn, and the mud season impedes the Central Powers in Russia. And what that means is if we had any artillery units in Russia, those would be spent before we had a chance to use them. And now we treat basically every province in Russia as though it were the Pripyat marshes, where we can't advance and attack after an advance. So that's what is happening there. We'll see what the Central Allies are going to do. Well, I think what we're going to do is we'll attempt to cut off the 4th Army. The Austro-Hungarians, supported by the German unit now, are not under the shackled to a corpse rule. We'll have them launch an attack into Poland, and if we can drive that 3rd Russian army out, we will have isolated the 4th Russian army. Wow. Then in the Serbian-Greek front, I'm not quite sure what to do. I think we could move an Austria-Hungary army into Gallipoli to help out the Turks, I guess. That might be a possibility. I might end up doing that. Well, the Central Allies ended up cutting off the Russian 4th Army in Posen, took all of the units there, including the heavy artillery I moved in. I made no actions on the Italian front, and I did transfer the 6th Austro-Hungarian Army into Gallipoli to help defend that from the British beachhead. That's going to be an end to the Central Allies. We're going to go through their production phase now. Turkey and Bulgaria each have an extra production point to use this turn. The Turks spent 2 production points to reconstitute the 2nd Army and Mustafa Kemal's 1st Army in Gallipoli. Bulgaria spent its point to reconstitute the Bulgarian 2nd in Serbia. And the Austrians refit the army in Poland and 2 armies into Galicia. That's going to end the spring 1916 turn. We'll move on to summer of 1916. Germany draws the 1916 card U-Boat Deutschland. If the United States has not declared war, receives bonus production point this turn. See Event 102 for description for details, and then draw one more event. Well, I'm going to draw that event card so I don't forget, and we'll place that out here. And then we're going to read about 102. And it says, if the United States has not declared war, then Germany receives 1 additional production point during this turn's production phase. And this refers to the Deutschland, which was the U-151 class U-boat, converted for use as a large, unarmed cargo vessel. And they made the trip to the United States. The crew was greeted at that time as kind of heroes, and they were able to bring back some important strategic materials from the ports in the United States East Coast, and they were greeted as heroes when they arrived back in Germany. So I'm going to give the Germans a production point bonus marker so I remember that they'll have that. We'll place that in Berlin as a reminder. Now we'll draw our extra event card, and that one is Zeppelin and Gotha Raids, 1915 plus, placed near the British Isles. Triple Entente P technology not active, that is not true. Triple Entente P technology active, reduce the Triple Entente P technology level by 1 for the remainder of this turn. All right. So we'll place the card near the British Isles. I think it's actually a token. Yes, it is. So we'll be placing that token near the British Isles as a reminder. Incidentally, last turn I forgot to mention that we had dogfights. Each of us has tactical air superiority markers, and both the Allies and the Germans failed to be able to deploy those last turn. So that's the dogfights are basically you roll 2 dice, and the differential, if you win, is the number of tactical air supremacy markers you can place on the board. So for Germany this turn, I think we're going to continue to use that heavy artillery and try to see if we can cause some casualties in the Rhine. And as for the Germans in Prussia, we've effectively cut off Posen, but we're cut off as well. So I think what I'm probably going to do is if we attack into Posen, that army will have no retreat path. So that might be interesting. I'm going to have to check those retreat rolls, but I don't think they can move into a vacant enemy-controlled space, and I believe that that army is destroyed. It's removed from the game. Yes, the defending armies would be permanently eliminated if they have no retreat path. All right, we'll make our combat attacks for Germany, and then we'll see what the results are. I just remembered I can't use that German heavy artillery with the planned barrages because I don't have air superiority, so I'm only going to be rolling 2 dice, and the Allies have the ability to use their heavy artillery in defensive fire. So that changes things up a bit. Well, the results of the attacks were we spent all the armies in Prussia, but we were able to destroy the Russian Fourth Army. It had no retreat path. I didn't do any other attacks on the fronts except in Tonga, which Letov Vorbeck was successful again, and he spent the British East African Army. We'll go to our production phase. Now we're going to have a total of 12 production points because of that U-Boat Deutschland card. So the results of our production phase, we were able to rebuild all of the armies with the exception of the 18th. We've refit our artillery, and I failed to roll for the dogfight. So let's do that. I'll do that live on camera. What happens is each side rolls a die, and if we win, the differential allows us to place that number of tactical air. Germany lost that dogfight, so they won't be 3-1, so they won't be able to place that tactical air. Now it does say, because of the Zeppelin raid card, -1 P-Tech during this turn. So if that was the case, the Allies would have no aerial technology, so we would be able to place it in that case. So that's true. So I'm going to place that tactical air counter in Hanover, and that will allow us to use our artillery next turn. What I also did is I transferred a point to the Austrians and a point to the Turks. And I forgot to do the German technology draw. So we'll shuffle that deck up and draw the card real quick. And the Germans get Stoßtruppen. That's the 3rd time in a row I've drawn that card, and we can't keep it. We don't have A2 technology. we do have A2 technology, so I can keep it. Oh no. Yeah, so we have the Stoßtruppen card, and it says Germany places the Stoßtruppen unit in any land supplied area containing at least one German army. May re-roll dice twice when attacking and advancing with attacking armies. Remove unit after combat resolved in the area. Redeploy in the movement phase. So we do get it. All right. So I'm going to place that Stoßtruppen unit. I think we'll end up putting that into Hanover. So we'll place that Stoßtruppen on the 17th German Army in Hanover. All right. Western Allies draw the 1916 card, French Mutinies. When a French unit loses a combat, France may make no further attacks this turn. France may not transfer production points this turn. All right. Well, even though we have the French Mutinies card, I think the combined British and French army is going to launch the attack into Belgium. They can utilize their artillery units. They'll definitely hold pat in the Rhine, I believe. And France can't transfer any production this turn, but Britain still can. So we might make a token Italian attack into Austria. And now let's see what's happening in Gallipoli. Well, in Gallipoli, the British have, I think, 2 fresh armies there. Yes, they do. And now they're dealing with Mustafa Kemal and the Austro-Hungarian 6th Army. We'll see what happens. I think the British want to still continue to pressure the Turks, but that Baghdad front is tough to supply. That costs 2 production points to refit an army on that Basra track, unless the army is in Basra. Well, the results of that combat was interesting. The combined British and French force nearly pushed the Germans out. The British BEF penetrated the German trenches, and he took out the German 10th Army. The British 5th Army followed that up by taking the 2nd Army out, and one of the French armies took out the German 4th, but they didn't have enough forces there to be able to drive them out. So the Germans held in Belgium. We made a token attack in Italy, and I was able to repair that army and repaired the French armies that were in the Somme, along with the British armies. We repaired the British army in Africa. I made one attack in Gallipoli that was unsuccessful, and I ended up repairing the MEF in Sinai so that the Turks can't drive us out of there. That would have been a definite mistake. The only problem I have is in Gallipoli on the beachhead, I didn't have enough money to refit the British 2nd, so we only have the British 4th there. Technically, if Austria-Hungary and the Turks were to combine, they could drive the British out. So we'll see what happens in that phase. And finally, in the technology section, the Allies were able to get A2 planned barrages card, which is going to allow them 3 dice when attacking if they have air superiority. Now, the Zeppelin and Gotha raids ended up taking us out of any tactical air that we could apply to the fronts, at least for this turn. So that Zeppelin raids token will be removed now, and the British will have to roll for dogfights the next turn. Okay, we'll move on to the Eastern Allies. Eastern Allies draw the card Central War Industries, card number 50. It's a 1915 plus card. And it says during the Eastern Allies combat phase, we have a -1 DRM, first attack this turn by a Russian army. And then during the Eastern Allies production phase, Petrograd's production points are increased from 1 to 2 for the remainder of the game. Place Central War Industries marker in Petrograd. Interesting. So we're going to place that Petrograd 2 production points token. It's going to increase Russia's production up to 5 now. Well, I think the Russians are mostly going to hold position. I think we will launch a token attack into Prussia so we can use our heavy artillery. But I think other than that, we'll take advantage of the extra production from Petrograd and kind of rebuild these armies. There's still 3 armies in the force pool for Russia, so eventually I'd like to build those and maybe get that Caucasus army moving. All right. Well, the Russian attack using their artillery into Prussia was ineffective. I ended up rebuilding 5 armies, and the only unfit army is the Caucasus army in Kars. But now with the extra Russian production coming, that's going to change that front a little bit. Central Allies draw the card von der Goltz, and that's a 1916 plus card. It says place on a Turkish army, roll 2 extra attack dice. That's very interesting. Von der Goltz was an elderly German general, and he was sent to Turkey to take over and try to help the Turks modernize their army. And he was in his 70s at the time, and I believe he died a few weeks or a few days before the British surrender at Kut. So that's going to be give the Turks a little firepower. We'll place that token. And I think I'll place the von der Goltz token on the Turkish 4th Army in Mosul, and that's kind of the area that he was in. The British surrender at Kut, or at Put rather, was somewhere between Baghdad and Basra, if I remember correctly. So that would be the track that he would be on. We'll do it that way. Well, I think the Austrians are going to try to take advantage of their heavy artillery in Galicia, and they'll launch an attack into Brest-Litovsk. That'll probably be the limits of their attacks there. I'm wondering if we should try the attack in Gallipoli, though. That might be interesting. Turks have 1 extra production point, so we could probably afford to do it. And we could launch an attack on the British beachhead, which is only defended by the 4th Army and a spent 2nd. The other thing I might take advantage of is von der Goltz, and maybe try to see if we can push the British back on that Basra track. We'll see what happens. Well, interesting enough, the combined Turk and Austrian army was able to destroy the British armies that were in Gallipoli on the beachhead. They could not use naval withdrawal because that location doesn't have a port. You can't use Constantinople for that. I was looking in the rules. I thought maybe the beachhead counter was considered to be a port location, but it doesn't really say that. It says about beachhead combat resolution, combat between units with the beachhead and enemy units in the adjoining land areas conducted normally. The amphibious invasion restrictions and supply special rules do not apply. However, if the beachhead unit is forced to retreat, it will be eliminated or naval evacuated. So if you check 7.26, which is naval evacuations, if the Western Allies or United States unit suffers a retreat while in a naval transport capable area, anchor icon, and have no eligible area to retreat to, the Triple Entente player may conduct a naval evacuation. This means that the retreated units are still eliminated, but not permanently, as would normally be the case. Instead, the naval evacuated units are placed back onto available force pool, and they can be purchased later. Well, I guess that Turkish port symbol is for that purpose. So we're going to place those British units in the force pool where they can be rebuilt. That's what we'll do. The attack from Galicia into Brest-Litovsk was successful. I spent the heavy artillery in the process, but we didn't really make any advancements there. So we're going to take care of our production now. Incidentally, the Turkish attack from Mosul, led by von der Goltz, was a success, and they ended up spending the Indian Expeditionary Force. So the Turks have 2 production points with the transfer from Germany, and I think we'll use those 2 to refit the 4th Army in Mosul. And I would like to refit that 3rd, but just in case the British were to try something again. We'll refit the first with Mustafa Kemal. That'll take care of Turkish production. Bulgaria has no production for this turn. Austria is going to have a total of 4 production points, and I think we'll use those to refit the 10th, the 4th, the 1st, and the 6th down in Gallipoli. Our artillery would be reset, and that is going to bring the Austro-Hungarian and Turkish Central Allies' turn to a close. And I think we are going to end the video here. We'll be picking back up with the fall of 1916, and we'll see how far we can get. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to the Solo Gamers Club for this playthrough of The Lamps Are Going Out World War I. I have a tranche of games coming in the next few days. Approximately 4 brand new board games, which will eventually be brought to the channel, so I'm very excited about those. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a nice evening. And I hope to see you again for the next episode of The Lamps Are Going Out. Good night.
Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile.